Hi there, and welcome to Fellowship of the Ring Pull, the 13th of February, day before Valentine's Day. I went into a shop to buy last-minute Valentine's presents and reminded the sales assistant behind the counter, I think I saved his marriage. He didn't realise it was February the 13th. Anyway, this is our weekly just get-together, talk about stuff that's going on in the music industry, in music tech, gear, talk about careers. And as we've moved on and developed this format, we're just getting the most amazing interaction between people who are just stepping on and raising their hand and contributing to the conversation. So it's something I'm looking forward to every week more and more. If you're on YouTube, links below in the video description is a link to a Google Meet. And basically, if you want to come on and contribute, you don't have to switch your camera on, but it's always nice to see your face. You just basically switch your mic off. And then if you want to raise a point, contribute, ask a question, just raise your hand. There's a little hand icon at the bottom there. So what's been going on this week? Well, I haven't got a YouTube video out this week, which is my first time in a long time. There's a lot going on at the moment, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. But I'm not allowed to tell you about it now. But there's some exciting developments and some possible news about this venture moving forward. Something crazy that's happening in April with Crow Hill, but also this desire to create a place, and that's moving forward a bit. I may have been looking at some consoles on the internet, Neve. If you've not subscribed to Crow Hill, to this channel, I think it'd be well worth doing, because there's going to be some really interesting stuff coming up. So do subscribe and hit that notification bell. So, Alan, did we have any questions left over from last week?
We did. We have a great one for you. So, do you think hardware, outboard or synths, are having a resurgence? Would you advise someone to invest? And what would be the first piece of hardware, other than a microphone, that you would recommend?
Okay.
Tough question.
It's a tough question, because I do think that with certain kinds of synths, there has been definitely, you can see that people are buying them as part of a kind of an investment thing. So I don't know, instead of getting stocks and shares, some people buy wine. And I think that there's definitely, you can see people buying guitars, vintage guitars, at auctions, that kind of stuff. And I'd say over the last 10, maybe 15 years, synths have become increasingly more valuable. Where outboard is concerned, I'm going to come back to that. Outboard doesn't jump to mind as an investment, but there is definitely a way of buying stuff so that you can claim it against your tax as part of your business expense, but that it doesn't depreciate in value. So stuff like the Manly Massive Passive, that'll basically, the second-hand resale value of that, if you hang on to it for 5 or 6 years, will kind of match what you paid for it new. That's what I'm seeing from outboard. The difficulty with stuff that's really successful and really popular and really sought after is that tends to be more mass-produced. So when you're talking about, say, for example, buying a piece of Neve, you'll probably find that those items are, they sell a lot of units. So you'll be able to find a lot on eBay. So the tip I would do is I would look at things that are on eBay now. And if there's, thousands of postings on eBay, that wouldn't be something that I would think is a sound investment. Conversely, I think that synths, their value will certainly, of certain synths, will apex. So the CS80 is probably the most valuable synth out there at the moment. the Putney synth. It tends to be certainly what I've established from my synth collection is the stuff that's sought after, but they didn't make many of. So I have a Prophet VS, which was an unsuccessful synth, but in the grand scheme of things, where digital synths are concerned, it was a very important part of the kind of timeline. And because they didn't sell many, it's now incredibly valuable. But something like a DX7 is probably not going to appreciate in value because they sold tens of thousands of units. I would say anything new by Moog until recently would have been a really good purchase. So anyone who bought like the Sirin, that's more valuable than the original sale value. But basically, I think if you're going for quality and you're going for something that's designed and has a healthy resale value, then I don't think you're ever going to really lose out. I think the thing to be really careful about is when you go into a music shop and someone says, oh, you want that Neve preamp. Well, there's this company who basically use all the same parts, and this is like $1,000 cheaper, or no, well, maybe $50 cheaper, something like that. You'll probably find it's just completely valueless the minute you take it out of the box. Whereas Neve, Manley, Empirical Labs, Thermionic Culture, they make stuff to small order. And I know, for example, their Rooster, which a lot of people really rate, their Rooster preamp is now quite valuable because that went out of production. SSL, not so much. Those kinds of things. And if anything ever gets put on as a limited edition, I would pick it up. But by and large, things with microprocessors, not really. But yeah, and again, sorry, I'm just going around in circles. I think Moog is not necessarily a good bet now, considering it's been bought. Other than that, I have to say microphones are a very good investment, and I think if you were to do some basic study into these new reissue Neumann mics, you'll see that the resale value of those has really increased from what they were on sale for originally about 2 or 3 years ago. So I bought a 67, a pair of 49s, and what was it? It was a I can't remember. There was another one I got. Was it I can't remember. But they're worth so much more than they were when I bought them, which is a pity because my U67 has a honking great dent in it. In other news, I do hope you're working on your Tina Guo trailer competition. This will, for the first prize winner, earn you a year's worth of Crow Hill goodies and the opportunity to work with Tina Guo herself remotely, which is how she does most of her sessions. And I've just read that there's a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees. So we have Bad Company, The Black Crowes, Mariah Carey, Chubby Checker, Joe Cocker, Billy Idol, Joy Division / New Order, Cyndi Lauper, Manya, Oasis, Outkast, Fish, Soundgarden, and the White Stripes. Who would be your one that you would vote for out of that list? Would it be Oasis? Would it be Joy Division? I don't know. For me, that's a damn good list. Outkast as well. Interesting. So maybe we should welcome some people on board and see what they think about this list, see what they think about buying Outboard. Hi, Mark. How are you doing? Your microphone's off, but it was a lovely wave.
Hi, Christian.
How are you doing?
Really well, thanks. Had a great week. I've got new toys. I got a CS12 panorama thing. No idea how to use it yet, but I've wasted a huge amount of time playing with it.
What's a CS12 panorama thing?
It is a interface that works with Logic and Cubase, and the mapping is just wonderful for an idiot like me that just likes to twiddle knobs.
Ooh, this sounds interesting. This is when these conversations get expensive. C12 panorama. Everyone's. I can see notebooks out. People tapping into their Google machines.
There's a great Don Segalis has done a great sort of fairly short walkthrough of it, and mine arrived a couple of days ago. Pretty easy to set up as long as you follow the instructions, but everything pre-mapped. And obviously a lot of the things with controllers is you waste a lot of time and it doesn't really work properly. This just works pretty much out of the box. I love it, and I've only really used it today. I've got very little production done, but it's set up, and I think it's going to be obviously once the muscle memory changes to use it, it's going to be very cool.
And does it feel well made when you use it?
It does. I mean, I don't have I do have a lot of kit, but not in the realm of what you've got in your studio. Yeah, it's got a motorized fader, which feels really nice. Everything else feels very tactile. So yeah, like with all these things, there's that learning curve. And, I think I've only had a full day with it. But yeah, I can see that. Give it another couple of weeks, and it won't be one of those things that gathers dust and I look at it and go, why the hell did I buy that? I think it's going to get used.
Something that I always worry about is the thing of getting a huge amount of muscle memory, and then when you go into a studio that doesn't have one of those interfaces, you're at a loss. I've been suffering from really, really bad RSI. And it's interesting, it's from using a trackpad, and it's not doing music, it's doing all of the graphic design for Crow Hill. And it's this movement, which, for an Englishman, you'd think we'd got good practice in. But it's this motion, and I'm like waking up actually screaming out loud. I'm in such pain. So I've adopted all of these new special kind of like mice and stuff. But I know it's going to make me completely disabled whenever I use a normal mouse, because I'll get so used to that. But I'll definitely have a look at that. It sounds great, Mark. And it's lovely to see you, Malcolm, again. How are you?
I'm fine, actually. Yeah, I thought I'd drop in again, see how you guys are doing. Very nice opportunity to chat and all that.
It's just will the winter just go away now in Scotland?
It's awful.
Yeah,
I'm a cyclist. I'm dying to get back on my bike. I've been out a couple of times. I was out yesterday, and my head was so cold I thought I was going to die. It was just awful. So hanging on.
Whereabouts are you based? Are you in Glasgow?
Yeah, just in the outskirts. So great access to the countryside, which is nice. Yeah, it's great. It's fab.
It might be a nice opportunity to talk about like your experience of, a game that I quite like playing with people is I Can't Believe That Band's Scottish. And how for a nation of, I think it's a nation of 5 million people, Great Britain is an amazing island for, its impact on certainly on popular music and stuff like that. But where Scotland's concerned, it's per capita, it's an even greater ratio. What do you think the reason for that is?
I think one aspect is that the city is quite, for me, it's the right size in terms of sparking creativity. I'm talking about Glasgow, obviously. In terms of creativity in the UK, I would say there's London, and some would say Liverpool, Manchester, and Glasgow is the main kind of focus, not just for music, but for a lot of different arts that are really sparky. And I think not so much if you compare Edinburgh, where you are, of course, to Glasgow. In Glasgow, there's always somebody coming up with some great stuff that you've never heard of. You go and see a wee gig in a bar, and there's this amazing banding, amazing things. And it's the same in one's own industry in terms of composers. Suddenly there's 3 people you've never heard of before doing brilliant stuff. It's because of the size of the city. You know, there's enough energy that these people can get nurtured and come through. Whereas, you know, if you're in a village somewhere, that's a lot harder. I know the internet's making it easier these days. So I think in the past, because I was quite involved in the music scene in the 80s, and I mean, everyone and their granny was getting signed. It was really hard not to get signed. You know, there's A&R people up from London every week.
Yeah.
And it did cause a bit of fever, which was bad amongst the bands. People responded to it too quickly, I think, you know, and would go out of their way to try and get signed rather than do good music. So
the two, I think, particularly when I speak to our American cousins, the two real surprises is Average White Band.
Oh, yeah.
And the other real surprise is the band that wrote arguably the teen anthem of the 80s, Don't You Forget About It. Simple Minds, and they're from Glasgow. Average White Band's a mixture of Dundee and Glasgow, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And why? I mean, you might want to explain for people who haven't visited. You might want to explain that Glasgow and Edinburgh are incredibly close together, but are very, very different cities, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, I go on holiday to Edinburgh, or I have done maybe 5 times over the last 5 years. I get a flat and I spend a week or so there because it's like going to a European city.
Yep.
It's lovely to look at. There's some brilliant things on. The festival's fab. But on the other hand, Glasgow is a real working city, and the people are friendlier in Glasgow and more approachable. If you're at a bus stop, you know, generally you can't talk to people, and that's okay. You're not labelled as a weirdo, you know. And remarkably, there's very little communication and collaboration between the two cities, which sounds crazy because we're only 45 minutes apart. But I just, you know, people just don't go to the opposite city much for social things. I don't know why that is. Mm-hmm. You know, we might as well be as far away as London. Sometimes I think there's, you know, I'm talking about 30 years here that I haven't seen much collaboration between people in Edinburgh and people in Glasgow. It's a completely different composer scene and music scene. The two shall never meet. I would say. Funny, yeah?
Yeah, it is. Russell, I'll get to you in a sec. It's something that was very interesting. Rick Beato, who has kindly been a bit of a mentor for me where YouTube's concerned, he has this theory about the amount of tonality that you're exposed to when you're a kid. And something that I've really picked up on is the huge difference between the Glaswegian accent and the Edinburgh accent. The Edinburgh accent is very monotonal. If you think of maybe Sean Connery, there's not much music in his voice compared to someone like Billy Connolly, who's from Glasgow, where it's a very, very, you know, kind of, it has a real tonality to it. And Rick Beato says that there's really good evidence of successful music cultures tend to thrive when people speak with a very tonal point of view, because it basically means that children really pick up on that. Yeah. That, and you know, the one thing I noticed, the real difference between Edinburgh and Glasgow is it's dialectic, isn't it? There is a banter, a way of speaking out there. Scots.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun made off the banter. You know, if you go into a Glasgow bar and want a bit of banter, you'll get it if you're looking for it. You know. Often at, you know, people's expense. Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing that if you're from Scotland, but you know, definitely if you're from Glasgow and you're successful, then in your hometown the absolute piss will be taken out of you.
Yeah,
without a doubt. You know, I guess it's a British thing. You know, in terms of not being a show off, to put it very
absolutely.
You know, you try and be a hero in your own town, and you can just naff off. You know, it's that kind of thing. Quite funny.
It's brilliant. Russell, sorry, you had your hand up, mate. How are you doing?
Hi there. How you doing? Welcome everybody. Nice to see them all. We've got a very Scottish-centric evening this evening. I think, Christian, you actually answered the question before it was even posed. It's the bloody weather. There's fuck all to do. I think that's that. Well, look at some of the greatest inventions in the world, Scots.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting inside all day thinking, what am I going to do with my bloody time?
I once spent a long car journey, and I'm sorry about the name drop, but with Chad Smith from the Chili Peppers. He's a massive Anglophile and has always been fascinated by how he calls it how this little outcroft off the edge of Europe has created so much music. Until he spent one of the Chili Peppers albums was, I think, recorded at Rockfield in Wales. And for those who haven't been to Wales, it's on that side of the country where it rains a lot. And he said it suddenly became clear to me that, when he was growing up, he was skateboarding and surfing and hanging out with chicks, as he put it, to use the vernacular of its time. And he said it became very clear to me that the British people didn't know how to talk to girls, were evidently terrible at sex. The weather was awful, so the only chance that we had of procreation was to learn how to play the guitar in our bedrooms. I love the way that Malcolm is firmly agreeing. That's the only way we'll get to it. But yeah, no, it is interesting, those long nights. And long dark nights as well, and it's amazing if you look at a list of Scottish bands, you'll be very, very surprised indeed. Anyone got any thoughts on the Super Bowl halftime? Anyone got any thoughts on Taylor Swift being booed? I wore my Taylor Swift T-shirt in solidarity, not for political reasons, but I have to say, while she is an incredibly commercial entity, I think she's done more for young girls, certainly last year, than and bringing them together in a sense of sorority than any other human being this year. So I thought it was a bit unfair that she got that heckling at the Super Bowl. And also the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees have been announced. Are you a Joy Division or more of an Oasis? Do we think Oasis should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Oh, Russell. Not a fan.
No, I have one Oasis album. I think that's all you need, really.
And that's it. The mic goes off. Mike, that's a Scottish mic drop if ever I've seen one.
One too many.
Yeah, I don't know where Oasis is concerned. The one problem I have is you can't listen to that music on studio monitors, and I do hope one day, now the loudness wars are over, they remaster them, because there's some quite kind of intricate. There's lots of guitars going on, and there's, the recordings are good. They did a lot at Rockfield, but it's just been mastered to within an inch of its life. It's like sausage meat. And I actually find it just physically quite difficult to listen to. And I'm really pleased that loudness war is now well and truly over. Malcolm.
Just on that subject, I'd be interesting to know what people in general think of remastered albums. They maybe loved for a year or two or more, and then they bought the remastered. Because certainly I was, don't know if I should name the band or not, but big fans of a band, and I bought the remastered, as you do, and it's just dreadful. I can't actually listen to it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it's maybe the age of the people remastering it, that maybe their high frequencies have gone and they're turning it up, or I just couldn't get my head around why it was so bad. I won't name the band.
Malcolm, I did that recently. I noticed that there were some remasters of Colour of Spring by Talk Talk, which I would definitely put in my top 5 albums of all time. And there was just something. One, it's not how I remembered it. And two, has this been done because they really felt it should be done, or has it been done because it's just an interesting way of record companies making us buy the same thing twice? Because for me, it just had lots of top end and lots of bottom. They put a smile EQ on it, and I'm sure they worked harder than that. It's a little bit like I'm really frustrated that I can't show my kids the original Star Wars, and I think there should be something to be said about the preservation of our what's the word I'm looking at? Our heritage, really. And suddenly things aren't, it's like, when you listen to those really smart amplifiers that kind of re-synthesize music and stuff, and it's like, well, are we really listening to something that's contextual? I don't know. Mark, you have some thought. Mark Bellinger.
I think you're right about the whole remastering thing. I think it's about what you listen to it on, the same way what you watch a film on. If you watch the original Star Wars on a 4:3 tube television, then it's going to look great. If you look at the original version on a high definition 8K screen, it's going to look crap. And I think it's probably the same with music. If you're listening to music from the 80s, even if it's, we were listening to that on a cassette tape in an 80s car with no sound proofing. And I think that's the thing. I think it depends what you're playing it on, doesn't it? It's like we if you play stuff on vinyl, it sounds completely different than a digital version. So I think it's relative to what you're playing it on, what you're listening to it through. We didn't used to have such amazing audio devices for playing and listening, and also visual for watching.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject. So before I get to you, Les, I think that there's I feel quite strongly about vinyl, and try to make sure if I am buying vinyl that it's taken from the original pressing, and not just they've dumped a WAV into a lathe and have created a master pressing plate or whatever it's called off that. I think what the interesting thing about vinyl is it's a direct energy transfer. So you've got someone vibrating their vocal cords into a microphone that's converted into an electric signal that does something on a lathe. And I think that is a physical connection, whereas the digital breaks that physical connection. And I've always said vinyl, it's not about what it sounds like, it's how it makes you feel. Les, bringing you in here.
Good evening. I can remember quite a long time ago, many, many years ago, I heard a 78 on modern hi-fi equipment with a modern cartridge, and the performance actually put into that vinyl, bearing in mind it would have been played back with a sharpened needle and a horn, compared to what happened when you put it into a hi-fi system, was phenomenal. What we could record and couldn't play back. So the testament of vinyl and the original mastering of the time was just unbelievable. You heard it. It blew me away back then.
Yeah. And Malcolm.
Yeah, I was. You probably know this, but there was a really nice story that I read the other day, in terms of the amount of tape people had to use. That when mono was at its peak, you had about an inch of tape to put that mono on. So if you had really good sound engineers, you had physically a lot of room to save that recording. And then shortly after that, we got stereo and then 24 track. So we're trying to squeeze 24 tracks into the same amount of space that people were putting mono on. And I'm not an audiophile, but I've got a couple of hi-fi systems for testing music, as I'm sure some of you guys will have as well. So I've got a great system next door, electrostatic speakers, and which give a very clear sound. And some of the best recordings that I've listened to have been the very early, kind of late 50s jazz records, where they've maybe had one microphone or two or three mics going through some kind of mixer and then being recorded in mono. And it's just a joy. You feel like it's in stereo. I don't know why, but there's a real kind of buzz about that. And it's to me, that's what I kind of focused it back on, It was maybe just the real estate that they had and the expertise. You know, it was a new field, this recording art. So they got these great engineers and using all their efforts to good results. So it's a verve level that I try and look for if I'm out. I see Les nodding his head there. You know, if I'm out at a record fair, I'll just pick up a vinyl like that, record like that, just to listen to the quality. You know?
And what they used to play with a lot more when it was mono was the depth. And a lot of that was to do with the fact that it wasn't balanced on a mixing desk. It was balanced in the room, you know, and the MD or the conductor or whomever, even with, you know, pop stuff, you know, like if you look at where they used to record those Motown hits, it was this small room, but it was all to do with the distance. And I mean, obviously Motown, a lot of that was stereo. But actually, if you look at old recordings, it was very much, it came from the radio tradition where they played with depth. And that was an important thing. If anyone is kind of new to the idea of recordings that have, you know, are really worth listening to, I would say one of the greatest albums of the modern era, recording-wise, with regards to putting some musicians into a studio, picking the right mics and placing them correctly, is called the Buena Vista Social Club. And it was just like one of those amazing things that happened because it was recorded in Havana in Cuba, I believe. I know it was recorded in Cuba, I presume Havana. That it captured these people who were part of an older tradition, but also because Havana and Cuba itself is a bit of a time capsule. Basically, you're able to hear this old-fashioned type of recording, but reproduced in a way that's been recorded in a modern context digitally and all of that kind of stuff. Well worth listening to. I'm personally really excited about where things are going. I just have no doubt in my mind that we're going to be returning to that. I think that people are going to increasingly want that human connection, and I'm really looking forward to... It's so interesting when I'm making videos for my YouTube channel, the microphone ones always do really badly, and it's like people are really interested in outboard, really interested in synths, all that stuff, but not microphones. And for me, it's like, well, if you don't get that right, and if you don't put it in a good room in front of a good player, and you don't place it well, then that's it's just going to be hard work from that point on. And I think that there's going to be a real resurgence. Someone was asking actually, and if anyone else has some thoughts here about it, someone was asking about hardware that's worth investing in, and I would say that stuff like mixing consoles, vintage ones, and reel-to-reel tapes, stuff like that, I would probably grab a few of those. I think that you will probably see those go up in value. Particularly with reel-to-reel tapes machines, they have a lot of parts. So if someone was to suddenly start making reel-to-reel tape machines again, that would require serious investment. So, pick up a Studio or a Revox, that kind of stuff. They're out there and they're quite fun to service, he says, having never done that. Charles, how are you doing?
Well, first of all, is my microphone working?
It is. Oh, it's more than working, sir.
You want me to turn it down?
No, it's it's brilliant. It's just like the bottom end from your voice is just fabulous. I could bathe in it.
Well, thank you. I put a note on there. Rycooter did that. Buena Vista sold, and from the first note, it's fantastic. And there's a wonderful documentary on it. I don't know where you would find it. It might be on YouTube. But I would highly recommend it to anybody. And I can remember when it first came out, I listened to it and listened to it and listened to it. Years ago, when I was a lad playing trombone, and I believe I told you I played lead trombone for the Ringling shows back when. And one of the seasons, I was raised in Sarasota, Florida, and Tampa was north of us. And there was a big Cuban population up there. And one of the seasons, they hired a guy who was a Cuban. He had escaped from Fidel Castro it was a sad story because the guy was a qualified physician, but when he got to the United States, they wouldn't allow him to practice medicine for silly reasons. But he was a trombone, as I said, a trombone player. And that guy, his sound was just huge. He was playing a tenor trombone, but it was like a wash of sound. It was fantastic. And they had great musicians down there. And as a boy, I can remember we could pick up AM radio pre-Castro, and we could listen to the Cuban bands out of Havana, and they were fantastic. I want to quickly segue with a question back to what you were talking about with the vinyl, et cetera, and so forth. As you know, we have the American Film Institute, and you have, I believe, the British Film Institute. Is there such an organization for music that does kind of the same thing? They not only curate film, but the American Film Institute has a school in Los Angeles, and I don't know if the BFI has one. And I remember years ago, I had a whole bunch of 16 millimeter films that my father brought back from World War II. They were training films that he got when he was an officer, and they gave them to him when he left the service. And I gave them to UCLA, and UCLA would take the 16 millimeter and digitize them, and now I think they're available on YouTube. Is there any organization that does that kind of thing for historical reasons to preserve music of that era, or is it just kind of the best? And that's my question.
Not that I know of. I know that there are individuals. So I know that there's a jazz label in London who have brought up huge catalogues and are preserving. One of the big problems that Malcolm, talking about the 80s, one of the big problems was when people were wanting more and more tracks, there was this whole period in the late 80s, early 90s where stuff wouldn't be put to tape. So they'd stripe some tape and synchronize the sequences with it, and it would go through the mixing desk and it would be printed. But in fact, one of the big problems that the record companies are having is that the multi-tracks are incomplete. So a lot of these synths were never laid down. I think there's one company that was really mega fussy about it and insisted that producers laid all of this stuff down. And one of the real worries, Charles, is this fear that hard drives will stop working. It's absolutely true. I've got a basement full of them, and none of them work. And these are my archives, and they're just, I could probably, get them fixed, but it'll be like the batteries inside will be corroding, all of that stuff. And I know that certainly with old recordings, when they remaster them, they have to bake the tape. Does anyone know about that? Because it's something to do with the oxide rubbing off. Charles?
Well, I actually have I've actually had personal experience with it, but when my wife and I lived in Los Angeles, there was a company, and I think they were called Penguin Recording. They were in Pasadena. And I took a bunch of old 2-inch tapes out there and some 1/4-inch tapes. And they would bake the tapes. They had some formula. I have no idea what it was. And then they would digitize it. When I went into that place, I was astounded because there were literally stacks higher than that of 1/4-inch, and maybe they had some 2-inch, but 1/4-inch tapes. I said, what is that? They were archiving everything from Universal and Warner Brothers label at that time. In one case, just because I thought, well, I think I'll see how it works, I had a reel-to-reel of some demos I had done in Nashville decades ago. And I thought, okay, I'll just take the chance and do it. So I winged it. There was no formula or whatever. And I used my oven, or our oven in the kitchen. And I remember putting it at the lowest temperature, like 250, on a pie pan with a rack and a cloth towel. And of course, I sat there and watched to make sure, with a fire extinguisher, to make sure I'm going to blow up the house. But the point is that I thought, well, it's probably about a minute or so. And I was right, and it worked, and I could do the transfer. Here's the reason here's the reason that they bake the tape. The tape is made out of mylar, and the sound, if you please, is recorded on oxide tape, which is basically oxidation iron, whatever you want to call it. And so what they want to do is make sure that the adhesiveness there's integrity to the adhesiveness. Otherwise, what would happen is, if you just went into your closet, pulled out a reel-to-reel tape, not right now, at room temperature, there's a high possibility that what you would do is have your tape start shredding, flaking, if you please, because the bond between the oxide and the mylar doesn't have the integrity. So in theory, what this does is kind of liquefies the bond, I guess is the best way to describe it, to make sure that you have adhesion. But I think it's a 1 or 2 pass deal. I think if you were to, let's say, bake your tape on your own and you were successful the first time, even if you did it immediately again, I don't think you could do it successfully again without some shredding. The other thing that I did, and I think they probably did it at Penguin, was they made very sure that the heads were cleaned, so they would use probably isopropyl alcohol with a giant Q-tip or something and wipe it off to make sure that there was no residue from the prior job, if you please, like sterilizing a needle if you had to use it. So they would make sure that that magnetic head that is reading the oxide is absolutely clean for the next pass. That's it in a nutshell.
Right.
If you can find a company that would do that, I would recommend that instead of doing the home remedy thing. And bear in mind, I only did one reel. I didn't sit down with a stack of stuff. And while you guys are talking, I'm going to see if Penguin is still in business, and if I can find it, if they have a link, I'll send it along. Thank you, Charles.
I do actually have a basement full of, I think they're 1/4-inch tapes of interviews with my grandfather, who was very famous in his day. He was actually the first person to speak on BBC World Service. And I think there'll be some really interesting stuff in there. But I will certainly heed your advice, Charles, and stick it in the pressure cooker for a bit. I'm joking. Get it baked. Malcolm.
Yeah, a related story, which I'll try and tell very quickly, was that I saw 10cc mentioned in the chat there. Maybe about a year and a half ago, I bought 10cc's live touring recording rig from the 90s, which was an ADAT system. So it was 4 ADATs in a box that they took on tour. And I bought it just for financial reasons. I do a bit of trading, so I bought that at an auction in Liverpool, and then it got sent up to me, and 3 of them worked. That was great. I was just about to sell them when somebody was visiting my studio and said, ADATs, I've got a lot of ADATs from a tour we did in the 90s. Can I bring them round? So this tour consisted of, it was quite a short tour. I think it was 5 days, and there was 8 ADATs for every gig. So that's 8 times 5, that's 40 ADATs. So it took me 3 weeks working about 14 hours a day, but I got every single bit of the tour off these ADATs, which are basically VHS tapes. That's all they are. But of course, it was really tricky in terms of data, because although I could get them off digitally, I had to get the ADAT's latest bit of kit, which was in '93, I think, which allowed me to take all the stuff off digitally and onto hard drives. And I found a guy who had hacked a bit of software to get the data off the hard drives. So it was a real, I used to be a software engineer. I think that's the only way I managed was, the patience of that. So it's great, and the hopefully it'll come out as a set of recordings at one time. But I mean, I've got the luxury for 40 track recording of one of my favourite bands here in the studio.
Wow.
Nobody's heard it. If you can come to the studio, you can hear it anytime. But some of the band members haven't even heard it. I think they all know about it now, but it's one guy I know who's keeping it to himself. But it's crazy. ADAT, I was to see the videos, just boxes of them coming in and think this is never going to work. But it did. It's perfect.
So for those of us, for those of you rather, who are of a younger persuasion, basically VHS is the I saw Elliot googling what's an ADAT.
No.
But they were basically it was this VHS, which was basically the worst of the video formats, but they were widely available, and you basically had these they were video recorder shaped machines, but you could record 8 tracks of digital, and then you could synchronize them together. And they were just they were part of the revolution that made a lot of recording studios close, because suddenly it was very much the forefront of recording technology becoming affordable. And it was of a digital quality. The AD converters were okay, but they were a fucking nightmare to use, because like any tape, and this was particularly low quality kind of domestic tape machine, you'd start getting dropouts and they'd chew and all of that kind of stuff. Just before I get to you, Elliot, I have a guilty admission that basically if you buy the Grease album, the Grease soundtrack movie album, there's 2 awful remixes, one of Summer Nights, one of You're the One That I Want, on the back, and I did those remixes, and it's still on the original soundtrack album. And I had the whole of Grease on multi-track on ADAT, and I just chucked them in a skip. And it was just phenomenal listening to those tracks, listening to the guitar. It's always the guitarist fucking around on his guitar, and then someone going 1, 2, 3, and ding, ding, ding. They're having no idea they were working on this legendary thing. I do have a DAT, however, with John Travolta's vocal isolated for that last note of Summer Nights. That is something you have to hear. And it's really funny because he never gets the note, and thankfully Olivia Newton-John is above him at that point. He doesn't get the note, and you can hear it's a punch as well. Elliot, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Just a bit of a cool memory unlocked. My first recording studio I went to at college had, I just googled it, the Alesis ADAT HD24. Is that what you guys are talking about when you say ADAT, those things?
That's the slightly later model that I used to be the intermediary between the ADAT and my machine. So
apparently I'm even younger than I thought.
I was on ADAT XT. But I believe that's what the light pipe was invented for. So these things could communicate. So those optic pipes that you put into your hi-fi now, and you'll notice they're called ADAT cables, was from that technology. And I don't know if it was a proprietary thing that Alesis invented or something they just bought in. But it was also... you bought a controller that would synchronize 3 of these things together, so you get 24 tracks. Just the noise of like one tape machine just going off into the distance, getting totally lost and whizzing round, or the noise or when you ejected it and the tape wouldn't come out and you realized that the tape was spooled and stuck around, so people would like back them up and all of this stuff. But the controller was called the BFC, which stood for Big Fucking Controller, which was they still tried to be
that's to the point, isn't it?
Yeah. And I remember the first time I remember the first time I ever recorded something into a computer and hitting save and going, is that it? Just this kind of idea that it was in there somewhere, as opposed to not being able to eject it out. But I'm looking on eBay at the moment for a half decent DAT machine. I'm going to get those DATs out and find that at John Travolta. You need to hear this to believe it. It's pretty phenomenal, top note that. Yeah.
It's so interesting hearing you guys talk about like reel to reel and tape because, well, I'm just turned 32, so I grew up with all digital. So it's always been cool. My first deal was Cubase, use Logic now. And I've recently started going into a deep dive of looking at cassette tapes and looking at reel to reels and then remembering I have a mortgage, so that's not going to happen. But it's so interesting hearing you guys talk about like how you used to deal with that because I've never had any hands-on experience. And the closest I got to a real to real tape machine was I used to work for a company called PMT, Professional Technology. And someone said, "Oh, I've got this thing. Do you guys want it?" And it didn't work, but I got it spinning and got some noise out of it. But it was a real different way of working.
Well, a lot of people don't realise, Elliot, that the business model for recording studios was selling tape. That's how they earn the money. It's a little bit like when you buy a printer and they make the money out of the ink. And the reason why a lot of studios went bust was not only because there were all these project studios opening up and people were doing it in their bedrooms, but it's because they stopped selling tape. So certainly when I went to Air Studios for the first time, and it was a recording of the original Bridget Jones soundtrack, which was Patrick Doyle, and they were still using a Sony digital tape. It was a reel-to-reel, massive platters. They were still using that. And I remember the next time I went, they were using Pro Tools. And I remember someone said, "Whoa, that's a bit risky, isn't it?" Because Pro Tools was still really like, whoa. There are things like you didn't do in those days, like you make sure that the clock was switched off on your computer because that would interfere with the clocking of Pro Tools. But also you wouldn't ever hard erase anything that you recorded when you were doing a recording session in Pro Tools because it would fragment your drive and then you'd get dropouts and stuff like that. So I remember the first days of using Pro Tools, everyone was just shitting themselves. It's a little bit like, until I think maybe 5-6 years ago, people didn't use VSTs live. They now do because these computers, particularly these Macs and these Mac Minis, have become secure and they've got these fail-safe systems. But it was like it took a while for people to adopt this stuff. But if you think that if you were recording something like a big Hans Zimmer score at Air Studios, it would have been done originally to analog tape. You would have been running two 2-inch machines to give you 48 tracks. It's a 96-channel desk they've got there. So they would have been doing at least 48 tracks. And basically every 20 minutes, they would be taking two 2-inch reels off. And they would be charging £200 per reel-to-reel tape, of which you could buy them. You had to buy them from the studio, but you could buy them independently for about 100 quid. So it was about 100 quid markup. So basically every 20 minutes they were making, maybe say $400, $500 from these huge tapes. And one of the reasons why you don't get this stuff archived is just simply the sheer mountain and expense of this tape. So I've got a 2-inch tape machine, and it's in storage, went into storage, and saw that I've got a load of Richard Ashcroft's multitracks there, and it's just like, oh, where do we put this fucking shit? But very famously, in fact, there's a brilliant documentary about this, and I don't know if it's on YouTube, but basically, videotape was so expensive back in the day when television first switched to video that basically they would reuse it. So when the BBC were archiving, there was this whole big TV series about different train lines and the history of train lines, and someone was archiving it. And at the end of this TV show, there was, I think it was the Old Grey Whistle test. It was the only time that the news had ever got delayed. And basically, Jimi Hendrix was doing the Old Grey Whistle test, which was live, and it was being recorded to tape. And he ran over. And so at the end of this thing that had been recorded over with this railway documentary is this amazing jam session with Jimi Hendrix. And that was discovered like in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, because this stuff was so expensive. And in fact, you know, with Spitfire, we always recorded to 2-inch. And we were borrowing and stealing that stuff and using it until all of the oxide had worn off, because no one makes it now. I think actually people have started making it again, but there will be a return, definitely. And I think it's, you know, this is my dream, is to set up maybe not, I think my dream is to set up a complex and for Studio B to have no CPUs in it. And it's not just the experience of threading tape and working with, you know, and those limitations of, listen, you don't want to rewind and play that stuff too much. You know, it starts to degrade and stuff. But it's also, it's an experience for musicians to work with that, to, you know, work on rehearsing, getting the performance right, but also having the opportunity at the end of a take for the tape to rewind is a very valuable thing. That moment of silence when the talkback mic goes off and you hear, just as the talkback mic is about to be clicked off, you hear as it rewinds, which is a sound I really, really like. I mean, one of the first big motion pictures I did in the dubbing theatre, we were actually working with film projector. And I remember the line producer said, listen, we've got to stop dubbing because the film, this particular scene was very underexposed. So the film was really thin. And she said, it's just going to be a nightmare if that splits, because we've got to use it for this, that, and the other. So, yeah, thems were the days. But I do think there's an interest in it, and that will be returning. And I think it's a skill set that should be preserved. Les?
It's interesting talking about tape, because that's where I come from, is tape and tape editing, stuff like that, and fixing reel-to-reel machines and all kinds of electronic bits and pieces. So that's my past as well. So, but going back to earlier on, we were talking about equipment and increasing in value, old stuff. There's a guy called Heinbeck. Are any of you familiar with him?
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, he is bringing tape back to life in such a big way, because all the things he's doing with tape loops and cutting and splicing and doing all that old-fashioned stuff and making music with it. I think for me, watching Heinbeck for the first time, I used to work at one point in my career in the avionics industry, and I worked with test equipment, and I used to do a lot of repair and calibration of test equipment. And I looked at Heinbeck's landfill totems, and I was going down this list of equipment thinking, I've repaired that, I've calibrated that, I've repaired that, and that, and that, and that. And I'm thinking, okay, what are these things worth on eBay? And because of Heinbeck, the stuff that was going into landfill is changing hands for phenomenal amounts of money, just like the synthesizers you were talking about earlier. It's just like, wow, this one guy has made this whole thing happen and turn this market round. But it's just blew me away, that one did. It really did. But can I make one statement before I go?
Absolutely.
My first sample pack has actually been approved, is now on Piano Book.
Brilliant stuff, Les. And yeah, for those users of Piano Book, there is a backlog, and that's because we are understaffed at the moment. There's one volunteer who's really overworked and stuff. So we are attending to that. And if you've got stuff in a queue, the stuff will be released very soon. Les, I will definitely promote that on the next Piano Book video.
Can we help?
I do.
Can we help in any way?
Yeah, it's something the next what's it called, episode that I'm going to film, I'm going to talk about the future and some help and stuff. And there's going to be a crowdfunding round for that project. For any of you who don't know what Piano Book is, it's basically a peer-to-peer sample sharing network. But it's not just sharing of samples themselves, but it's skill sharing as well. And there's a great kind of community there. Well worth checking out, pianobook.co.uk, soon to be audioincubator.com. We're rebranding that and relaunching, hopefully, at some point this year. Charles.
I came in late, so I have a brief question. How is the contest with Tina's trailer thing coming along. I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm not going to enter anything. I personally, I just like to let the young people go at it. As I tell younger people, I made a touchdown and I hit a home run. I want other people to do their thing. But how is that? Are you getting a lot of good submission, or are you getting a lot of submissions? I guess that's the question.
We are. Yes, we are. I think that I'm probably going to need to do another video explaining about trailers and the approach to them. I get it. I guess it's interesting. It's that. I think it's something that after putting your 10,000 hours in of being a media composer, you take working to a brief and working within those constrictive environments for granted as something that's easy to do, but it's not. And it's interesting, I'm doing a lot of graphic design work at the moment, and it reminds me of what it was like when I first started out doing media composition. When I'm doing graphic design, I'll find a new skill and I'll end up with an end product that looks nothing like what I intended. And I think I remember that as in my early days of composition, that I would get good at something, I would get a brief, and then I wouldn't hit the brief because it would take me on a tangent. So it's going to be very interesting to see what comes of that. But yes, we're getting lots of entrants. And if you're interested in that, Alan, if we could put those details in the video description. But if you basically go to thecrowhillcompany.com, there's a big banner for a Tina Guo trailer competition. You don't have to own the new library by her. It's just basically some imagery that we have provided for you to create a trailer to, and the winner, there's going to be runners-up prizes as well, but the winner will get a year's supply of Crow Hill stuff as and when we release it, and there's some really good stuff coming out, along with the opportunity to work with Tina herself. And she is a very progressive cellist. Progressive is such a bad word these days. A progressive cellist who has taken Hollywood by storm, and you'll hear her on stuff like Dune and Wonder Woman and you name it, she's done it. She's also really, really wonderful, very inspiring person to be around and to work with. There's a few faces I haven't seen here before. Jeremiah, did you want to say hello? Where are we speaking to you from?
Hi. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, crystal clear.
Great. I'm here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So I'm saying that fully because sounds like we've got a lot of people that are not from this part of the world, which is great. I'm taking in a lot of info. I like listening. I mean, I'm a musician, so I guess that's telling. I'm not terribly sure what to say. I guess I've been using Crow Hill products for just a short bit now, and I use Labs by Spitfire. So, and several other VSTs. I rent a place here in Vancouver because real estate is fucked. So, and I'm a young guy. I'm 30. But I saw, I see the social media that Crow Hill puts up, and of course every other VST that I'm following, that company that I'm following, and I'm just trying to get in on the conversation, learn a little bit from my peers, and listen. I've been playing music since I was 16, so 14 years or so, and played in bands a lot here in Vancouver, and that was a really great experience, but I'm now trying to figure out what producing looks like from my space here at home, and starting that journey with myself. And I think it seems like an ever winding one, but it's exciting. And I guess I could say a lot, but I have a tendency to be tangential, so I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing to be if you're a producer or a composer, is go and investigate those nooks and crannies, and just keep at it, Jeremiah. That's the thing. Most people stop, and it's just all, there are people. I was fucking awful when I started, and I'm not saying that you are. And you just get better at it. But I would say, the thing I would always say is to very much keep an open mind, and not to turn down things because you think that's not what you wanted to do, or that's what your journey should have been. There are amazing things that I've been very, very surprised by. I, like a lot of lads of my age, got into writing music for film and TV because I wanted to do Star Wars. I wanted to do robots and spaceships. And I did a robot and spaceship movie, and it bored me senseless. But I also accepted a job for this Belgian detective called Poirot, and it was just the greatest period of my life. There are so many. I remember going to a careers advisor at school, and I said I wanted to get into film, and they said acting or directing. And I said, you do know that there are other jobs in film than that. Have you not noticed? I didn't say this, but I thought, have you not noticed what all those? Have you ever thought about what those names are at the end of a film on the credit roll? And I think there are so many different applications for what we do. And something that I'm noticing with friends who are maybe generation, I say professional generation, not behind me, but a bit younger, is that certainly the multimedia thing is something to really worth looking into. I know a lot of people are doing really well with these kind of premium podcasts and stuff, but it does involve a mixture of producing, music making, but also sound design, dubbing, that kind of stuff. So, get skilled up and go along those tangents, because they may prove to be fruitful in ways that you never imagined. Kevin, with a beautiful dog in the background, I don't believe we've seen you before. Certainly not in this location.
No. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I'm actually a transplant. I'm a Essex boy by nature, but I'm currently in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been here for about 20 years. Carving myself out in the indie world of movie production, film score. In fact, I just finished my third movie that comes out on streaming platforms 2 weeks' time. Did it all in Logic. You may have seen me actually lurking on some of these posts, that challenging myself to do everything in Logic. And I've done it 3 times, and it's not perfect by any means, but we did a test at the cinema for the premiere on Saturday, and immensely proud of how it sounds on the 5.1. And so, following Spitfire for years, obviously Crow Hill for years, you for years, and I figured I'd jump in on my lunch break and say a quick hi to everybody. Massive amounts of information on these podcasts and these sessions, so I'm really excited to be able to say hi to everyone.
That's brilliant, Kevin. And I believe that Phoenix, Arizona, there's all sorts of stuff bubbling away there. I know that there's, what's happened in LA is disastrous, but California in general has become a very expensive, difficult place to live. And I know particularly, I think what happened with lockdown is it opened our eyes to us not having to be in these kind of conurbations, in these hubs, if you will. But I've also heard of a lot of some interesting studios being built there and stuff like that. Am I right?
There is, the West. I mean, it's since I've been here 20 years, it was literally, as you see in the Wild West, wagons rolling, tumbleweeds, and in the 20 years, the industry, especially in the media side, is really being built up. I think that the challenge is the state doesn't offer very many tax incentives. So we're the flyover state right now. So people are going to New Mexico. I've had work out of there. I get a lot of work from LA. Not shooting here necessarily, although the film I just mentioned was entirely shot in Arizona. But a lot of it, because of the state incentives, are just dire. There really isn't a lot of productions happening right here, but that is changing with the build of a lot of these new studios. So the next few years are going to be very exciting. And I'm in my home studio, Albion Sound. So you like the reference to Albion, but purely because of the poetic reference to the UK where I'm from. but also I have every library that you've ever touched, Christian. So I think, but yeah, I think it's exciting, and this scene, especially with these guys here, just listening and sharing the knowledge that you guys are giving is. I mean, I every day I'm tuning into something, if it's a replay on YouTube or a live session like it is today. So very thankful to be here, and I hope to be here a lot more often as well.
Thank you, Kevin. You're most welcome. And Malcolm, that's an interesting thing because until very recently, I moved up to Edinburgh 10 years ago. I've only lost one job because I wasn't based in London, and by all accounts, that was because the director sounded like a really controlling individual anyway, so I probably dodged a bullet there. But that's something that's certainly very exciting that's happening in Glasgow. It's that there are parts of Glasgow that were very run down and a bit kind of abandoned, am I right in saying, the industrial areas? But to me, there are certain bits that have the feel of Berlin of 15 years ago. I don't know if you'd agree, Malcolm.
I would agree, but it's been like this for 25 years. There's just new parts of the city opening up. I used to live in Pollokshields, and the old tram garage was converted into a place called the Tramway, which is now a fantastic theatre space, which is as good as anything in Europe. It can hold amazing kind of shows of any scale. So there's always something going on in Glasgow. I feel, and the place that you're involved in is really exciting. That studio in the church. So, I don't actually know the guy that's behind that, but somebody was saying that he was a bit of an innovator and has several properties in the city.
Yeah.
People with vision, not scared to have a go. Yeah. I would say. There's a lot of dreadful stuff. I mean, I think another difference between Glasgow and Edinburgh is you can kind of walk around Edinburgh, anywhere, and you don't feel threatened or ill at ease. But sometimes you can, if you're not aware of exactly where you are in Glasgow, you can end up somewhere you're thinking, I don't feel very safe here. I don't feel, and that's just a result of the way things have developed kind of piecemeal, I think, over the years.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, it's not something that I particularly relish saying, but Edinburgh is the safest city in the UK, and based on certain crime figures, however they calculate these things, and has been for the last 10 or 15 years. And until very recently, Glasgow was actually murder capital of Europe, wasn't it? There was terrible kind of gang warfare and stuff. But what's interesting in areas like that, and I know that Bristol is quite an interesting place to be in, as is Manchester, is that what happens is that when you have a situation like you have in London, which I mean, one of the reasons I moved out is I felt it had become Manhattanized, where I grew up in Notting Hill, and that was my stomping ground. And that fucking film, I'm not joking, it absolutely ruined what was a pretty rough area, race riots and this, that, and the other. But it was also this melting pot of poets. And it was where the reggae scene met the punk scene, and you had all that ska stuff going on, and the Notting Hill Carnival, which they try and move into Hyde Park every year, and all this kind of stuff. But London has become massively gentrified and a very unwelcome, unfriendly place for young artists. So I'm always, very keen to kind of big up cities like Bristol, Manchester, and Glasgow as very, very interesting scenes to move to, particularly at a time where people's expectations of you being round the corner. I mean, I can't remember the last time a director came to my studio to view some reels. That last time that happened was 15 years ago. So being kind of geographically minded is I mean, I think it's important where there's a scene, go to that. But for what I'm seeing, I mean, I literally haven't been to a dub in London maybe for 4 or 5 years. They're all happening in Manchester now. So there is a migration. And I know that English people migrating to Scotland were the biggest migrant group in the UK at the moment.
Well, amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another face I haven't seen. Envry, how are you doing? Is that how I pronounce your name? Henri?
I'm sorry. That's my username.
Okay.
My name is Elijah. I forgot to log in with the right email, so I apologize about that. But yeah, my name's Elijah. I'm I'm currently based in Kansas City in the States. And yeah, this is my first time at one of these, and I keep seeing them on YouTube, and I saw it live, so I was like, hey, why not? I'll stop by. But yeah, I'm a composer, I'm an artist, music producer, pianist, and I'm just very curious about everything Crow Hill does. And I've bought a lot of Crow Hill libraries, and with no regrets so
good.
far. So yeah, and yeah, I've been featured in the mailing list like a couple times, and yeah, I've written some pieces exclusively using Crow Hill stuff. So yeah, I'm just incredibly proud to use everything you guys make. So
that's very sweet.
That, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'd hate for the podcast to become an advert for Crow Hill. I mean, and that's something that is going to be happening in March, April. Is that I really want to redefine what we're doing is that the samples enable us to do what we're doing. And when you do a startup, you do have to be very commercially minded, but I want to pivot us away from being perceived as a sample company per se, and more as a I don't know. I mean, my experiences with Spitfire and what happened during lockdown and thereafter are some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And I'm going through a personal thing at the moment of I've given up the booze. I've been sober for 5 months now, and thanks guys. And I just something that I've just realised is that I think that escapism is something that people want to do, and escaping into music is, I think, one of the healthiest escapes that there is. And I think that one of the problems that we all have when we're learning music is this idea of virtuosity and theory, and that's all. I mean, I'm all for it, but I just think that there's a lot to be said for sitting at a keyboard and playing some cool sounds, and what that can do for your head, as they call it up here. So that's going to be a slight kind of a bit of a position change for Crow Hill coming up, because I think that there's a lot of stuff that isn't being utilized out there at the moment, and I want to bring back the MIDI file. I think the MIDI file is a fantastic fucking thing that can be used to be exchanged between people like ourselves to learn from, and I think there's still a bit of a life in that old bugger yet. Charles.
I'm going to make you angry.
Oh, no.
I thoroughly disagree with you on music being an escape route. Christian, when you go into music, you're going home.
That's very good, Charles. Thank you. I think I might sample that. I love that. For me, it's that there's nothing better than that huge, like famine-like hunger. That maybe that's not a word I should use, but that hunger you get where you've completely lost time and you've gone into a time warp. And the only time I've ever experienced that, other than making music, was the first and the last time I used TikTok. Because that is like that scene out of is it Interstellar, where you go to this planet and you come back and everyone's aged 30 years.
Well, I want to tell you a true story. You saw my wife come in with me with the tape machine. We've been married 50 years. We moved to Nashville, and like many other musicians, I had the moment of the hell with it, I'm getting out of the business. We happened to be in the bedroom getting ready to go to whatever we were going to go to. And my wife took a shoe and threw it. It was a high-heeled shoe, and threw it at the wall it pierced the wall, and she said, "The hell you're going to quit. We moved here for you to do the music, and that's exactly what you're going to do." She won the argument, by the way.
Yeah, that's.
Yes, you're going home. Sir, you are going home when you're going to music. And I don't know about your marriage or anybody else's relationship, but when people ask my wife, "Susan, where's Charles?" "I don't know, but I know he'll come back to me because right now he's on that planet." So
yeah,
bless you, sir. Remember that. You're going home. You're not running away.
Charles, thank you. That's very kind. And Jeremiah, before I come back to you, I'm very, very lucky to have an incredibly supportive wife who is also a musician. So kind of there's that thing of gets it. I was going to announce to the world that I was retiring because I just had enough of narcissists in the film industry. And she said, "Well, just announce it to me, but not to anyone else. And you can go back." And she was absolutely right. And I just took a pause. That's when I started the YouTube channel. I didn't actually say I'd retired, but I felt that I could just be honest about these things, and that's what motivated me to start the YouTube channel. But she's absolutely right. I've been through a pretty rough time of it over the last 2.5 years, and I was very fortunate to have a job that I was working on. It was a 2-year job, just composing every day, for hours and hours and hours. And it got to the point where I'd actually run to work. I was so excited to, as you say, go home, but also to get lost in it. And it's a wonderful place to get lost. Jeremiah, sir.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just this whole conversation that's been had up until this point has me thinking. I just rewatched. I don't know if anyone's seen it. His Dark Materials trilogy, the show on BBC. Read the book, of course, and watched the series now twice. It's just resonates with me a lot. And this whole conversation from talking about early production, early pop music, to where we are now and how we use music to evaluate our lives, or where to go in our lives, or where we sit right now, whatever that means to us, is really fascinating to me. I think of the theory behind the show where, I'm not going to ruin anything, but the concept of childlike wonder and imagination, and how we try and constantly revisit that as adults. How do we constantly try and I'm only 30, God, but obviously I see it. I hang around a lot of older folks than myself, and have friends that are 60 and plus, whatever. So it's just interesting to me that no matter where you're at in life, there seems to be a attachment to finding that consciousness that you had, that lack of inhibition. Like there's this wonder that we're searching for, and when we find it, when we're making music or we're experiencing music, I think that's why we can't quite quantify why that early pop music sounds so good in mono, and we can give it formula, we can give it equation, but at the end of the day, it's kind of just because it happened at that time. It happened maybe in an early state of mind for that medium, and it's okay that we can't capture it completely again, because we still have that, and we got to hold on to those pictures of that era, of that piece. The video rental store in our neighborhood here, one of the few left, maybe, I don't know. And I frequent it. I love it. It's a great store, VideoCat. And the owner there, I talk with them, and we talk about how the physical medium, because he sells plethora of media there, is so crucial, because streaming platforms, though they are great, they hold the monopoly on what we choose to take in. And me, I've got tons of physical media here. I love it. I've always loved it. Inherited old records. And that is something that I think I want to continue to perpetuate to people, is that I love my VSTs. I love everything about digital. It's so handy, but I'm speaking to the choir here, that there's nothing quite as impactful or quite a photograph than the physical product of anything. So I think it's just this revolution of thought that just keeps perpetuating in this conversation.
Absolutely.
I wanted to put onto paper.
And the greatest thing about making music is working with musicians, and I'm so surprised at how many people actually will go a long way without ever experiencing that. What can be brought to the table, and the collaboration, and just the minuscule change in a bit of finger pressure, and how that can change and revolutionize a take from one to the other. And that's something I really want to promote, is this: you've got to work with musicians. It's awesome. And I think that's going to return. But I totally agree with everything you're saying, Jeremiah. It's real magic. I love thinking back to those, you remember when you heard. So one that's really stuck in my head was the first time I heard and was conscious of a sampler was Art of Noise, Close to the Edit. And I know I was in a traffic jam at the end of Kensington High Street at the bottom of Kensington Palace. It's just, and I remember it was a sunny day. I remember what car we were in. I remember where I sat in the car. And those things, they're kind of branded on you as these incredible moments. Anita Baker, When I Lost My Virginity. Needless to say, I've never heard the middle eight of that track. Sorry. I'm seeing a lot of faces going like that. Something that I just absolutely love these weekly get-togethers, and we'll probably bring it to a close now. If anyone knows any girls, probably after that last comment, probably won't feel welcome, but if anyone knows any girls, do recommend that they come along, because it is just, I know that more men watch YouTube than girls, and there's that kind of skew, but that's something also that I've got 3 kids, 2 of which are daughters, and I would hate for them to ever feel that they weren't welcome in our industry. My wife, 2 albums ago, she did an album. It was only women who made it, and it wasn't some big, punch the air women's rights thing. It was just about energy and about, we listened to so many albums that are just made by blokes. What would it sound like to listen to? So everything all the way through to the mastering engineer was female. Fiona Cruikshank was the tracking and mixing engineer and co-producer. And what was really wonderful about it is that for a period of about 6 months, my youngest daughter would go and visit my wife as she was recording this. And, she was like, I want to do Fiona's job, which is an audio engineer's job. And not that I would say it to her, but if I were to say to her, how rare it is to walk into a recording studio and there are no men whatsoever, I know what her response would have been. It's like, why? Because these people were doing such a great job. So if anyone can encourage lady friends to come along and join us here, I think that would be most appreciated, so that we have a diverse pool of contributors, and it's just amazing what everyone's contributing and what I'm learning all about. And Les, did you say that you worked with tape?
I used to, yeah, many years ago. We used to work with 2-track, 4-track, 8-track, 16-track.
So if you come back again, I'm going to ask you about splicing tape, and particularly crossfades on tape. But let's hold it for next time. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And gentlemen, and hopefully it's going to be ladies and gentlemen soon, but gentlemen, thank you so much for joining, and hopefully see you next week. And thanks so much for your contribution.
Thank you. Could you ask Alice to join us?
So